I'd like to welcome you to the special meeting of the Bristol Planning Commission. I'd like to start off by having the members introduce themselves, starting on my far left.
Gary Harrison, Commissioner. Gary Lawton, alternate.
And on my far right.
Which one?
John Shorter, Vice Chairman.
Bill Beats, Chairman, and
Alan Weiner, City Planner.
Glenn Chalder, Consultant.
Robert Flanagan, Assistant City Planner.
First item on the agenda.
We have updated 2000 Plan of Conservation and Development. A, continuation of commission discussion on booklet number 6, possible development strategies.
So I think at our previous meeting, we got up to page 16 in the document, so tonight we're starting on page 17 of booklet number 6. The development booklet really deals with how the city would like to guide growth in the future. The topics we dealt with last time had to do with residential development and also business development. Tonight, the first item up for discussion is whether or not the commission thinks it might be desirable or advisable to include a section in the new plan that discusses the concept of institutional development. Institutional development is kind of a funny word here, but Blake Compounds is an institution in the community in a sense, and yet the plan is almost silent about them. We have Bristol Hospital, which is a major institution, and there are some issues that go on with their situation in terms of activities associated with the hospital. There can be issues associated with religious facilities or educational institutions or private clubs or court facilities, etc. And so on the bottom of page 18, I suggested for discussion purposes some policies. But I think the first basic question is whether or not the city thinks that we should have a goal of managing institutional development, or should we address this issue? Thoughts?
The only thought I had on this, and maybe it should go in here, was ESPN. Because we're talking about new compounds, which is big, and Bristol Hospital, and that's the only thing that I would suggest on this, and I really do think that this should be in there. ESPN, I don't know what you recommend there.
As an institution.
Well, would you call it an institution? Or would you call the compounds an institution?
I think that's part of what I think is one of the dilemmas of a section like this.
Right.
And I think in the 2000 plan you made reference to Lake Compounds. In one respect, Lake Compounds is a business. I mean, that's what it is. It's a business. It's a it's privately. It's privately held. I don't know if they're on the stock market, but I mean, it's a profit-making business. But it clearly is more than just a business. It's rather iconic, and I think we tend to separate out the business component of it from the fact that it's really an iconic part of Bristol's history. So I think that's is the dilemma. I mean, ESPN is an institution, but I think in a different, maybe because it hasn't been here as long as Lake Compounds has. And you could argue that that's one of the things that defines Bristol, is that it's there, it's known worldwide, it's part of the popular culture, probably more so than Lake Compounds is, but to people who are familiar with amusement parks in the United States, Lake Compounds is kind of a big deal. So it's kind of an interesting dilemma. How do you treat it somehow differently, and give these part of their own section, or do you recognize that they're important businesses and just put them all back there?
Any thoughts?
Well, I guess my only thought, though, is even like compounds almost closed down at one time. And so it is a business, and anything can happen to it. Same way with ESPN. Departure was a large business, and they're gone. So I guess I'm concerned about that kind of revolving door. It may take a long time to happen, but it could happen. And then we have a document that references something that no longer exists.
It's hard to plan on something when there's no certainty about it. Even at times like these, there's no certainty about it. You don't know. I mean, look, I moved here in the 70s. Everybody figured New Park would be here forever. Next thing you know, it's gone. And ESPN at any time can pull up stakes. Like compounds, like Marie said, has come close to closing several times. It is an institution. It has developed part of Bristol, but how business is a business, and they're going to do what they want to do, no matter what the city of Bristol wants.
But is that the reason that could happen to anything we have in here?
We do. If I can jump in just for a moment, what might make sense is following what Alan mentioned here, that ESPN and Lake Compounds are businesses. They are located in business zones, and maybe what we do in the business development section is carve out a special discussion for special uses. Now, corollary to that, Bristol Hospital is a little bit different in the sense that they are a business use, but they're in a residential district. And there are areas around them, and we do have, they're going, and the whole healthcare industry is going through a transition now too. And I think what I suggested for consideration for policy here was to balance ways to support their growth. Having a local hospital is pretty key, but also understand the impacts to the neighborhood and try to find a balance. And I think, that, to me, that's kind of the overriding principle that I would like to, for the commission to kind of consider is not to ignore the hospital. They are a huge part of the community, but to get this concept of balance into the plan might help the city down the road.
Since they're being bought, does that change it?
Yeah, the Bristol
Well, we say we
Hospital
don't know.
bought.
Oh,
Now,
should we mention
that
that?
change something? Would that maybe the new owners not want any to deal with anything, but they're going to do what they want to do no matter what the city wants to.
Well, they can't do what they want to do, but it's...
The owners could.
Well, not in terms of land use and zoning.
Oh, no, but I'm saying
Right.
they want to shut the hospital.
Right, no, that's
We can't.
certainly.
You know, so kind of, once again, put them in a plan that there's no certainty of what they're going to do. I get worried that if we give them something, you know, what happens when they're gone? We have nothing.
So that balance, for me, I'm just going to throw it out there because I'm not sure I'm thinking right, would be to identify those entities in a broader sense. You know, I mean, Bristol Hospital can change its name, probably will with any mergers, but that site is unique and is generated as a health care unit, medical unit, however you want to describe it, and that really should follow through for future planning. And I think the same way with ESPN and campus, Lake Compound, so you can kind of identify the entity, but recognize it may not be there, but what do you do with the land afterwards? What would be our recommendation?
Well, I think that right now it doesn't get too specific about exactly what the future reuse of the campus would be. And I'm not even sure, in this planning period, we may not be talking about reuse because they may continue to be there. But whatever happens at that site, to me, the principle could be, and what I crafted here is policy number 2, consider ways to support the overall mission of Bristol Hospital and evolution of their campus while balancing its impact on adjacent areas. So if somebody came along and said, we're going to turn that into a major, brain surgery facility. So it's no longer a community hospital, but it's still a medical. Well, okay, that could be consistent, but we still need to balance the impacts about what they're going to be doing with what happens in particularly within that neighborhood, because it is surrounded by residential homes, et cetera. So I think in some of these concepts about finding a balance, other things which are listed in this section are some of the, we have, in some situations we have, in some communities there are religious facilities that are quite large. I mean, major auditorium facilities that can have significant impact on residential neighborhoods, educational institutions, private clubs, state or federal facilities. And I think this portion of the plan could give the commission and others in the city an opportunity to have language in here that talks about trying to find this balance.
Glenn, would you consider, I'm sorry, would you consider follow up on the chairman's comments, would you consider ESPN an institution?
No.
In your humble opinion?
I mean, I think it's
Not
not
to go
a
against the
classic definition of institution, but in terms of an iconic business, I believe that they and Lake Compounds are. I think they're worthy of special consideration. I think Alan's observation that they really sort of are businesses, to me, suggests we're not dealing with them in residential districts, which I think is what we're happening with these other ones. And what I would suggest is we carve out a special section in a business chapter to talk about these iconic businesses. And again, we'd like to support them and their long-term mission. But
So would
this,
you move Lake Compounds from this section?
I think move it into business and create a special subsection, special businesses or something like that, the ESPN law.
Okay. That's fair.
Anything else on 17 or 18?
No?
So is the intention to, once you move out Lake Compounds out of here, is the intention to otherwise keep this section or to?
I think I will massage this language in terms of, in the plan document, the first draft, describing the fact that these are activities which occur in residential zones. They're important uses in our community. They enhance our quality of life. They provide support for a lot of things in the community. But having said that, they don't get to run free rein. That's what happens. We need to find a balance to support these uses and also understand the interests of neighbors.
Good.
Starting on page 19 is the discussion of possible downtown strategies. As everybody knows, there's quite a bit going on in terms of discussion about the downtown.
Yes, there is.
It seemed to me that how do we plan when there's so many things which are in a state of flux at the present time? I went back and looked at the 2000 Plan of Conservation and Development, and I think that there are big picture strategic visions for the downtown which are in that chapter. I didn't find them particularly well organized or really sort of as explicit as I would like them to be in a plan document. So what I've attempted to do here is to take that information and put it into a format which is similar to the other sections of the plan, where we're really talking about an overview which identifies the circumstances which are affecting the city, key findings, conclusions, and issues, things that make downtown specials, and things that we'd like to try to accomplish for our downtown, and then get into the goals, policies, and recommendations, and carry those forward. So you'll notice that many of the policies have not changed very much, but they've been reorganized, and there's also some goal statements in here in terms of, I think, what our performance objectives for us to try to accomplish. So it's similar to what you have, but I think it's organized in a way which I think is sort of clearer on what our strategic objectives should be for our downtown. So whatever happens in the downtown, whoever is responsible for whatever entity becomes involved, these are the things that we hope to accomplish, and that's the approach we'd like to take. Does that overall approach sound like a reasonable one? So on page 19, 20, and 21, I'll try to summarize the background that brings us to where we are today in terms of the evolution of the downtown when it was created, following the 55 flood, the urban renewal in the downtown with the Center Mall, and then acquiring the parcel, and with the facility gone, establishing the Downtown Development Corporation, doing the preferred developer approach, and the work that they've accomplished, and really sort of setting the stage, if you will, in terms of where we are today. I have taken some graphics from the material that was prepared by Renaissance, because I think there was quite a bit of work that talked about this. So it's not meant to be Renaissance specific, but it's meant to sort of discuss some of the concepts that have been described for the downtown area.
If I can jump in, I think one of the concerns that I have reading this a positive spin on it is that, notwithstanding the fact that much of the recent focus has been on the property across from City Hall, that alone isn't downtown. And I'm concerned that we will end up spending way too much time talking about and thinking about downtown as if the only thing that's downtown is what's across the street. And I think we need to collectively disabuse ourselves of that idea and look at a much bigger picture. And I don't think that, personally, I don't think that changes any of the goals and policies and recommendations very much, if at all, from what you even had in the 2000 plan. I think those of you who were here for that recall you really kind of looked at a big picture, and regardless of what else might happen, you had established a framework for downtown revitalization and stabilizing and strengthening the downtown. So I think that's the one concern that most immediately jumps to.
Yes, back then, our first part of our mission was what was downtown, the boundaries.
Right.
That was the big thing.
Right, and that may be a discussion that you may want to have again. You're right. When you did the plan last time, if you have your plan with you, go to the map after page 75 in the 2000 plan. That shows what the boundaries of the study area were, and you pretty much defined this as the downtown area. And you may want to discuss whether or not you think that boundary is still applicable. That is downtown bigger than this? Is it downtown smaller than this? And my general observation is that Bristol has a rather unusually shaped downtown.
It is.
It's long, it's narrow, it doesn't have a lot of grid streets. It's very dissimilar to downtowns in many other cities of comparable size. I think in part that's due to the topography. It's due to the old land use patterns that existed pre-urban renewal. The presence of the rail line certainly defines part of downtown, or much of it. It seems to me that may be the first conversation you want to have. Where's downtown?
If I recall, when we did that, we went round and round on the boundaries, by street by street,
It was not easily...
It wasn't easily defined initially.
I think everyone has a different mental map of it, and possibly, yeah.
Well, I think, I'm trying to remember the conversation of why we went down.
Well, that's not the downtown map.
No, I know.
That's the downtown map.
Yeah.
The map that's in here is the
Stylized.
Is the consultant's stylized version of it, but that's not the downtown map. And I don't know whether it's something you need to decide tonight. I mean, if you feel that all the goals, policies, and recommendations that are in the downtown section of the plan are contingent upon what are the exact boundaries of downtown at this point, then you perhaps need to make those decisions tonight. If the feeling is, well, we can probably all agree on parts of it, and maybe have the discussion on other parts of it, then perhaps that's a discussion for another night. If you feel that you can proceed with discussing goals, policies, and recommendations for downtown, regardless of where the exact boundaries are, at least from a planning perspective.
I have a suggestion. It seems to me that there are some changes that are probably warranted in the boundary of the 2000 plan. I'm thinking of the addition here of the parking of the police station, for example. And if you look at that property there, that line probably needs to get pushed back a little bit, or it gets pulled down to the police station. But and there's a situation there that might warrant some modification. And there's also been the development of this street here. It looks like it's kind of straddles the border of the downtown. So I think if the commission's comfortable with the idea, if Alan, Robert, and I can actually prepare a map and come back to you and say, okay, based on from the map in the 2000 plan, here's where we might suggest some modifications. Add this, subtract that, and give you sort of the logic for those changes. We don't have to start from fresh with this map here. We start with this map and show you, not, I'll call it a zone change, but it's not. But say, okay, we think that we're going to add it, expand it out a little bit here and cut it back a little bit here. And you look at it and say, you know, you went too far, you didn't go far enough.
That's fine with me.
Does that sound okay, Alan?
No, that works for me. And I think that, I think where this gets a little bit tricky, and you know, maybe it will cause the boundaries to expand, is the commission doesn't have to necessarily be limited to, here's where downtown is now. You may feel that, for whatever reasons, but I think they have reasons, you may feel that the downtown can encompass a larger area, or maybe a smaller area. As an example, and I'm just throwing this out as you know, as you well know, there's been a lot of conversation about Memorial Boulevard School, and one of the issues associated with Memorial Boulevard School has been that if it is converted to an arts facility, a community space, how do you link it to the rest to downtown? Because it's not viewed as being in the downtown. Well, then maybe if the commission says, well, maybe it should be considered in the downtown, and that the city, and it may not be viewed as being in the downtown now, but maybe one of the goals is to figure out ways to connect it into and make it more a part of the downtown, which may involve the Barnes property.
Right next door.
So, I mean, that's a way of thinking about this. And there may be other places where you go, you know, that's not downtown. That's not even remotely downtown. And, you know, so maybe the boundaries contract in some places, or maybe you're happy where they are now. But I think that's I think Glenn's suggestion is probably a good way to start.
Yeah.
I would throw out there, I was at the Memorial Boulevard Task Force meeting, and they were talking about the Barnes facility allowing overflow parking.
Right.
So that it is kind of connected.
Yeah, and you know, one of the thoughts, which I know came up again during deliberations about Memorial Boulevard School, was if it becomes an arts facility, for example, and there are evening performances, how do you encourage people who might want to come downtown, grab a bite to eat, and then go over to the school? Well, you can drive over, but maybe people want to walk over.
Right.
Well, if you want to walk over, is it a pleasant walk? Are you walking by the back of a big old industrial building? So that may, again, if you say, well, that really should all be made part of the downtown, integrated into the downtown, may not be part of it now. We see value in making it part of the downtown.
There's something that complements downtown.
So,
it's a gateway to downtown.
Yeah. Or you may be perfectly happy with what boundaries you got now. I mean, that's part of the exercise.
I know it's all residential along West Street, and there is some industry at parts, but I was trying to remember why we left residential off, when in fact, you know, we're talking about the downtown having mixed uses. So I'd like us to think about maybe using the West Street also as part of the natural boundary line and include the house. I can't think of any reason why.
I think the reasoning, if my memory is correct, I think the reasoning was that much of it was primarily residential, and that it wasn't viewed as the core of downtown, but it was the transition between the downtown and the more residentially oriented areas beyond that. But again, if you think about the downtown, not just in terms of what's here, but what you'd like downtown to encompass, then, perhaps, extending the boundary over to West Street may make sense. But I think that, I think that's part of the exercise.
So Commissioner King, you're talking about West Street from Bingham School all the way to School Street, or past School Street?
Well, we already hit part of it, so it would just follow a natural course.
Well, actually, it doesn't. Oh, only the very northern end.
Right.
If everyone flips to 10-2, the next page, it's a little bit better to view it.
Oh, yeah.
School Street.
You're right, it just stops it short.
Yep.
It might be desirable to think about downtowns as containing a couple of different components to it. We couldn't have the downtown core, but we can have some fringes too. And this might lead us to some land use recommendations and other things, again, which will try to strengthen the downtown in some different ways, or may relate to building heights or other things, that, kind of a stepped approach. And following up on what John talked about, I think gateways are an important thing. In terms of community design,